Let me next introduce you to a tool you'll use with JavaScript called Bower. So normally in a .NET project, in Visual Studio 2012, 2013, 2015, if we want to use third-party projects with a .NET application, we would use NuGet. We right-click on a project, there's actually a Manage NuGet Packages UI. Pops up and lets us look at certain projects out there and add support for them into our project. Now we want to use jQuery, and jQuery actually has a NuGet package with it. But this NuGet package installs it into the project in a way that's more compatible with ASP.NET 4 and below. That's because there were certain ways that the older versions of ASP.NET worked, and NuGet was really the only way to do package management in those projects. In ASP.NET 5, they really have separated these ideas. We're still using NuGet for our server-side dependency management, but they want to defer to something that most of the web development community already use to do client-side package management. And that's what Bower is. Bower is a tool for doing that. So let's come in here, and it's going to start with a configuration file for Bower. So let's go ahead and add a new item. And one of the things we can add is, under our client side, is a Bower configuration file. This creates a file called bower.json in the root of our project. And this is just a configuration file that lists what dependencies are needed for this project. Normally you wouldn't check in these dependencies, but when someone gets a version of the code, they would let the IDE or let Bower re-download and re-fulfill those dependencies and the dependencies of those dependencies. For example, there's a project that's often used called underscore. We'll actually use it later in our project, so let's bring it in here. We can add it as a member of this dependency object in the JSON scheme. And the way that these editors work is, as I put in the name, you can see I'm actually getting IntelliSense by reading the repository that Bower has of all the different projects out there. And it's doing some IntelliSense to see what projects exist, and we want the plain old underscore. And when we do a colon, it adds some quotes, and then IntelliSense is reading the current version of that project. Now I could get 1.83, which is the latest stable version of underscore, or I can say get 1.83, but if an upgrade happens, that's okay. We're getting about this version, and that's what the tilde means in front of it. And what happens when I save this file, when I add this into my project, is that Bower is going and downloading the project into our WW root for me, because it knows it's a client-side file. In fact, we now have a lib folder here that has underscore, and in the underscore folder are the pieces that make up underscore. Most importantly for us is an underscore.js or an underscore -min.js, which is a small version, a compressed version of it that is normally used for development against. You could see underscore JS would be the full source, and then the min version is the one you would use at runtime because it's smaller to download, it's smaller to parse, that sort of thing. But how did it know to put it in this magic folder? Where is that setting? When we installed the Bower JSON, it actually also installed a second file called .bowerrc, which is the configuration options for Bower. If we double click that, we'll see that it actually specifies the directory that Bower is going to install in, and by default that is our wroot lib. If you want this folder renamed into some other name or structure that you prefer, simply changing this name will change where Bower drops them. For our needs, the default space that Visual Studio is installing with this file is good enough. We can ignore that Bower RC file from now on and just know that every time we add a dependency here, we're going to get it inside of a lib directory inside of our WW root. What we're really looking for here is jQuery. jQuery is another library that's very common in use in web development, and our project is going to be no different. We're also going to need jQuery. And just like I did before, I give the name of jQuery, brings me in, shows me some versions, and I'm going to tell it to get me about the latest jQuery version. And as soon as I save this file, as soon as I make that change, these dependencies are being loaded. I now have jQuery under my lib folder. In fact, if I really want to see how these dependencies work, we can see that under the dependency tree is now a list of our Bower dependencies. If I open this up, I can see the different dependencies, and if they had other dependencies, if jQuery depended on some other library, they would be shown under here as well. Because what Bower is really doing is saying, go get the thing I need and anything that it tells Bower that it also needs. So that as we build libraries on other libraries, this is pretty common. This tree view here is a way to quickly take a look at them. This flies in the face of maybe how you may be used to using dependencies or third-party open source projects. You may be used to going and downloading it and dropping it in a folder, or using command line tools to go ahead and install it. This is one of the things I really like about the way that Visual Studio is doing it, is that we're actually maintaining the configuration files and it's noticing the change and changing our environment for us. In fact, this works the same with our project JSON file, and later on even with our NPM dependencies for tooling. Now that we have jQuery, let's take a quick lap around jQuery so we can see why we might want to use it instead of this raw JavaScript that I showed you how to write already.